Hola, soy Lara Hudy de Nux Laboratorio. El día de hoy estaremos conversando con la experta, la doctora Sonja Bastian, acerca de enfermedad celíaca. Vamos a invitar a la doctora Sonja Bastian desde Alemania a conversar con nosotros sobre este tema.
Hola.
Hola, hi, Dr. Sonja Bastian. How are you? Welcome back.
Yeah, I'm nice to be invited to talk to you again. Thank you very much.
We are very excited to have you here with us to answer to some questions.
That's very impressive for me. So start with your first question.
Okay, we are going to speak today about celiac disease, and we are having some question about our lifestyle and our about gluten and about other some things. So I'm going to start with our first question. Do you think are we eating like humans from century 21?
No, I believe that we are still Stone Age people with all our biochemistry in our body. So our enzymes, our proteins, and all of our stuff in our body is just from Stone Age. And we eat very modern food, and that's too much for our body. So several diseases will appear that are autoimmune disease because we react against some foreign molecules more often than we would do if this diet would be more appropriate to us.
Great. And what is gluten?
Gluten is a part in wheat, rye, and barley, and it makes it is important for the plant to get good babies, for example, to develop their own ancestors. But for us, or for some people of us, it is very hard to cope with because it makes is a trigger for the gluten sensitivity and for celiac disease. And people who are sensitive against gluten, they will develop the disease. So it's just like an on-off trigger for these diseases.
So do you think there is a different impact in men and women or different ages?
Of course, it's the celiac disease, for example, it develops more often in women. That might be explained by the hormonal status, for example, or for the sensitivity of women at all, because they keep the children, they get pregnant, they should be very defensive against foreign proteins. That's a kind of thesis. In men, it's a slightly more rare, and children develop celiac disease more often than adults, but adults are also affected by celiac disease, even if they hadn't celiac disease in youth.
Which kind of test could indicate a celiac disease diagnosis? How can we know if we have a celiac disease?
Well, a lot of doctors think that only biopsy is the method to detect celiac disease, but that's not true. We have very sensitive tests available against the tissue transglutaminase. That is a specific enzyme which is involved in the gluten degradation process. And if people develop celiac disease, they build up antibodies against gluten, but two against the enzyme which digests gluten to gliadin. And that's the transglutaminase. And these anti-tissue transglutaminase antibodies can be detected in ELISAs that are simple laboratory tests today. And you can do it in an automated fashion in the lab. It's easy and it's routine for us today. And then you can easily detect celiac disease. But you should do a second method to enhance the sensitivity. That might be, for example, the endometrial antibodies, but this is a little bit more complicated test. But for the first hint to say this patient has the risk to develop or has a celiac disease, then the tissue transcriptaminase at the first step is useful.
Right. And who should be tested for celiac disease?
Oh, that's a lot of people. The list is very long and growing, I think. That's really a joke. First of all people who have a first-grade relative. That means father or mother or child or sister or brother who has developed a celiac disease should test themselves to exclude that they have a subclinical form of celiac disease. The second is that all people with gastrointestinal symptoms should be considered to be tested, especially those who get the diagnosis irritable bowel syndrome, to exclude that there is an underlying celiac disease. The next group are people with autoimmune diseases like diabetes type 1 or Hashimoto's thyroiditis or rheumatoid arthritis, and especially the juvenile idiopathic arthritis. I just read a new article on that. They can be at a higher risk to develop celiac disease. Then people with some skin diseases, for example, psoriasis or rosacea or urticaria, should be tested. Another group are people who have neuronal symptoms like migraine or ataxia or sensory disturbances like tingling or numbness on the skin. They should be tested. You see, it's a large group, and you always should keep in mind that nearly up to 2% at the moment have a diagnosis to suffer from celiac disease worldwide. 2%. And I think the dark number is much more higher.
Is celiac disease 100% genetic or multifactorial?
You need a genetic risk factor, that is the HLA-DQ2 or 8. If you do not bear this genetic factor, then you never will develop celiac disease. 30% of all people worldwide carry this haplotype, so they are at risk to develop celiac disease, but not everybody will get the disease. So what are the triggers to develop? There is a huge amount of extra corporal triggers. That is, for example, how you were nurtured during your first month of lifetime. Did you get gluten during this time? The next is, did you have multiple and severe infections, especially with rotavirus, enteroviruses, or noroviruses? The more you had and the more severe they were, the higher the risk to develop celiac disease. The next is that you can have medical treatment like antibiotics or a cesarean section that are small risk factors, but maybe they take part in the development of celiac disease. And last but not least, a big, huge question mark is the microbiota. The composition of your microbiome is very important, whether you develop or not a celiac disease.
Can a patient develop another disease because they didn't respect the gluten-free diet, for example, cancer?
Okay, yeah, of course. The risk for complications is very high if you do not be very strict to your celiac disease diet, the gluten-free diet. The first and most severe complication are lymphoma, which will appear in skin or in the gut. But there are more other symptoms which are severe, and that might be, for example, neurological complications like ataxia, which can be developed in the elderly patients and which enables walking and leads to disability and the wheelchair.
Yes. At what age will this disease manifest in life?
Nearly at every age. You can get a celiac disease, as it is well known and defined for years, at a disease of the youth. But today we know that it can develop in childhood, disappear, for example, during puberty, and reappear in the elderly, or it can appear only in elderly people. So it differs very much, and it's one of the reasons why we call it the chameleon of the medicine. It has so many faces, and it's hard to diagnose just simple on clinical symptoms.
Okay, and is there any treatment for celiac disease?
The only treatment is the gluten-free diet, and you should be strict in this diet. You should avoid completely gluten. It's really like a on-off mechanism. If you ingest gluten, you will get symptoms right in another day.
Yes. Can a celiac disease patient live a normal life?
Of course. There are so many products without gluten, and you can easily live without gluten, and you will never be malnourished. If you do not adhere to your gluten-free diet, your mucosa will be affected, and it is not able to absorb all the nutritions and micronutrients and ions you need. So if you do not adhere, you will get anemia or other deficits in vitamins and other factors.
And what are your recommendations to the public and to the people that are seeing right now this video?
If you got the disease, the diagnosis to suffer from celiac disease, start immediately with a gluten-free diet and be strict over the whole life.
Thank you, Dr. Sonja. We are so happy to have you here, and I really hope we can have you again in the future. Thank you so much for answering this question. I am sure that we will have more in the future.
I think so, and it's always nice to meet you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for being with us. It has been a pleasure, really a pleasure to see you again. Muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Esperamos que les haya gustado esta sesión de preguntas al experto sobre enfermedad celíaca y los esperamos en nuestros futuros videos en nuestro canal de YouTube.